Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Dan Clark. Change in Albany is just a few days away. This was the last full week that Andrew Cuomo spent in office since he announced his resignation last week. His last day is Monday, meaning Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul will formally take office Tuesday. And in the days leading up to that, we should learn a little more about her incoming administration. But for now, the big question is, who will Governor Kathy Hochul pick as her LG? We don't know too much, but it looks like she's at least narrowed it down. Here's what she said last weekend.
A lot of people are interested. I would say there's a lot of energy and excitement. I've narrowed it down in terms of the geographic area of the state to New York City because I am an upstater, even though I've spent thousands of hours in New York City and I'm well familiar with the challenges. But I want someone who lives there. I want someone who understands that the challenges firsthand.
So let's talk about that and the other news of the week with Anna Grunwald from Politico and Yancey Roy from Newsday. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Absolutely. So Anna, let's continue this conversation about Kathy Hochul's LG. We don't know a lot, but what do we know? Who's going to be the LG?
Well, we don't know that. But we do know she said she'd like it to be someone from New York City. And I know that she's really emphasized that she would like women and more diversity in her, what will probably eventually be her ticket next fall when she runs again.
Sure.
But I think there have been a lot of guesses about who that might be, some prominent New York City politicians. A name that's been brought up quite often is State Senator Brian Benjamin. I know some people have been curious about maybe Jamal Bailey. I know that there's been some other younger legislators who also have said they've had conversations with her. But as far as what those have entailed, we're not quite sure yet. And I think she has indicated that sometime next week we might find out.
Brian Benjamin is an interesting choice because we already see him at the lectern in the Senate anyway, and that's kind of part of the LG's duty. So he knows how to do that. He's got a leg up there. Yancey, what are you hearing on the LG pick?
Folks are hearing the same names. One that's been out there a little bit also is John Liu, state senator from Queens. He's also the former city comptroller, so he has like a city base, an electoral base in the city. He would also diversify the ticket. He has said he's not entertaining thoughts about being LG, which gives him a little wiggle room. But he says there's more to do in the state Senate. I think one of the things to make a point about here for the lieutenant governor pick is it's going to be more about the ticket for Kathy Hochul in 22 rather than the day-to-day responsibilities of the lieutenant governor, which is to preside over the Senate and be there in case anything happens to the governor and basically travel the state. I mean, that's an important job. But at the same time, I think the more emphasis is going to be on who can diversify her ticket. She's going to be an upstate woman running, which will be, top of the ticket. That'll be new. There's Cynthia Nixon, but there's, be top of the ticket. She'll be new in that sense. But she wants to diversify because I think a lot of people are looking at Tish James as a possible candidate. There are other downstate candidates that might be out there. So I think she wants a downstate person to sort of balance out electorally and also to be able to tap into a donor base, which in New York State is centered at downstate.
Yeah, and I think that I know that she said that she wants a different relationship with her LG than she had with Governor Cuomo, in the sense that she described it as kind of a Joe Biden, Kamala Harris situation where they're really partnering and working together as number one and number two, rather than number one here and two is just irrelevant traveling the state and not close with the governor. I think that's interesting. Anna, how do you think that would change the dynamic at the state capitol? Would things change?
Well, I think that would obviously put a lot more emphasis on the role, and that's something that Kathy Hochul herself has done entirely of her own accord, it seems. She has kept herself extremely busy. Even when Cuomo had sent her places across the state to be the face of the administration, she would add her own events. She would talk to other people. She has really changed the role, I think. So it will be interesting to see if, like Yancey said, it will be entirely focused on balancing the ticket, or if it will be someone that she really will utilize and consult with in a way that maybe she never was used as.
I keep hearing from people that have been with Kathy Hochul at events, reporters, otherwise, that she really goes to these small towns that the governor has not gone to, and parts of the state that he has also not gone to. I'm talking about like I think he's gone there, but the Chautauqua counties that don't get a lot of attention in state government. I think that's interesting because we have one maybe sort of LG pick, Jumaane Williams. He's the New York City public advocate. Seems like he may not make it, but he's been doing a lot of traveling upstate on certain issues, which may mean that he's laying the groundwork for a campaign for governor. Yancey, what do you think about Jumaane?
He's a name that's out there. I mean, he's got a city office as a city advocate, so that it immediately makes him a candidate for a lot of other places. We've seen that office launch other careers. Tish James, most notably, who's now Attorney General. And you know what about traveling? I think also to be watching for. Kathy Hochul is going to be sworn in pretty soon. But in terms of electoral politics, I don't think there's going to be a long, long honeymoon for her before other folks decide to start going out, making their name known, because I think that strategically they can't let her get that big of a jump. I don't think you're going to see people wait till, for example, December to start doing things. If you're interested in becoming governor, this is a rare opportunity.
Yeah, this is a time where you really have to get in this race to get the donors on your side before they decide to support Kathy Hochul if you want a chance at the primary. Speaking of primaries, or I guess people leaving office, Governor Andrew Cuomo is leaving office, obviously. We saw that he is moving out on Friday with U-Hauls at the Executive Mansion. Don't know when he's going to be out, but this leaves the question mark of what comes after Andrew Cuomo, and what does Andrew Cuomo do after this? Anna, what do you think?
You know, I really don't know. We haven't heard much from him over the past few days, and I think you can look to you can look to his predecessors. You could look to Eliot Spitzer, who eventually did re-enter the world of politics after some time. I think there's probably going to be a waiting period, but it doesn't seem like Andrew Cuomo or even his supporters think that he will be, flying off to Aruba and never seen again. It sounds like he still will have some things that he would like to say in the political realm. And I don't want to be cynical, but I think that people's memories are pretty short when it comes to these sort of things. And leaving office for whatever reason can sometimes be forgotten pretty easily in a couple years.
Well, that brings up the question, Yancey, do you think Andrew Cuomo will be relevant in state politics after this? Like how we see Donald Trump obviously still relevant in national politics.
It's not impossible, but it's going to be difficult. And I agree with what Anna said. And at the same time, there's a couple little loose ends out to play here, which is what happens with all of the evidence that the Assembly gathered in its impeachment process. What's in there? How damaging is that? What happens with the criminal complaint of sexual harassment in Albany County? What happens in the 4 other counties that are looking at sexual harassment complaints? Might all just disappear now that he leaves office. But right now, you don't know the answer to those questions, and those could have a lasting effect on what he does next and when.
Yeah, the impeachment report is now underway. We learned last Friday that they were dropping the impeachment investigation, that now there's virtually no chance that Cuomo will get impeached because of legal reasons, I guess. Anna, what do we know about what they're doing in terms of now? They said that they're moving the investigation forward. What does that mean if they're not going to impeach him?
It sounds like they're still gathering evidence and trying to put that all in one place for a number of different things they were looking at. And as Yancey was just talking, I remembered there's the whole thing that started some of the backlash against Cuomo, and that was the investigation into how he handled nursing homes during the pandemic. And that's being investigated, I believe, on a federal level as well. And so there's still more bad news potentially, and that could come out from the Assembly.
Yancey, we have just 1 minute left. What do you think the consequences are of this report? Do you think the consequences are strictly on Andrew Cuomo, or do you think this will create a much bigger conversation around misconduct in state government?
I think it's going to be strictly on Cuomo. I think it's going to center on what they did, as Anna referenced, the nursing home report and the undercounting of deaths there. The book contract, he was paid $5 million for a memoir. There's been a lot of reports about him using state personnel, possible violation of public officers law. I think it's going to focus on him.
Yeah, and it should be said that JCOPE, the state's ethics agency, has really been quiet on all of these issues surrounding the governor. They may be doing some sort of investigation at this point, but we don't really know because their process is very closed doors because they don't want other people to be accused publicly if they're not found to have done something. So we'll watch out to see if JCOPE changes, I guess. But we do have to leave it there. Yancey Roy from Newsday, Anna Gronwald from Politico. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.